You're sweating through your shirt, it's 45 degrees outside, and your electricity bill just hit record highs. You reach for the AC remote like it's the only option. But what if people figured this out 2,500 years ago? No plug, no bill, no problem? We're talking about one of the most overlooked engineering stories in human history. The Persians, the Egyptians, the Greeks. They didn't just survive brutal desert heat. They built systems so clever that some of them are still running today. Still cooling buildings, still working, and modern architects are now copying them almost exactly. Let's start in ancient Iran. You're standing in the middle of Yazd, a city that's essentially a giant oven. The sun is merciless, the ground bakes, and yet you walk into a house and it's cool. Genuinely, surprisingly cool. How? You look up and see these tall, tower-like structures jutting out of the rooftops, some stretching over 30 meters into the sky. Those are windcatchers, or bad gears in Persian. They've been doing this job since before most modern countries even existed. Here's how they work. The tower is built with openings facing different directions. When wind hits those openings, even a soft breeze, it gets funneled down into the building. At the same time, hot air from inside the building rises and gets pushed out through a separate set of vents at the top, like a chimney working in reverse. The whole system creates a continuous loop of airflow. Cool air in, hot air out. No moving parts, no electricity, just physics doing exactly what physics does. But the Persians didn't stop there. They paired these wind catchers with something called a qanat, an underground channel that pulls cold water from mountain sources miles away and runs it beneath the building. As the wind flows through the wind catcher and travels over that underground water, the air drops in temperature dramatically. We're talking about water sitting at 15 to 20 degrees Celsius underground, even when the surface above it is scorching. That combination of wind and cold water could bring indoor temperatures down by up to 10 degrees. That's not a small number. That's the difference between surviving and thriving. If you're finding this kind of stuff mind-blowing, you're going to love what we're doing on this channel. We dig into the history, the science, and the forgotten genius that shaped the world. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Trust me, it only gets better from here. Now let's cross over to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, because they had their own version of this. And honestly, it might be even more impressive because of how simple it was. They called them zir pots. Take one large clay pot. Put a smaller clay pot inside it. Fill the gap between them with wet sand. Put your food in the smaller pot. Cover it with a wet cloth. That's it. Sounds almost too basic, right? But the results were wild. As the dry desert air hits that wet sand, the moisture evaporates. Evaporation pulls heat out of whatever it's touching. That's the same reason you feel cold stepping out of a pool. The inside of that inner pot could be 10 to 15 degrees cooler than the outside air. No ice, no freezer, no electricity. Just 2 pots and some sand. Tomatoes that would spoil in 2 days could last up to 3 weeks inside one of these things. And then there's Athens. The Tower of Winds, built in the 1st century BCE, was this elegant octagonal structure with niches carved into it, aligned perfectly with the prevailing wind directions. It functioned as a timepiece, a weather vane, and a passive cooling system all in one. The Greeks understood that if you positioned openings correctly, you could let nature handle ventilation without doing much else. This wasn't accidental architecture. These people studied the wind, tracked it, and built around it on purpose. So why did we abandon all of this? That's the part that genuinely stings. When air conditioning became widely available in the 20th century, it felt like a revolution. And in many ways it was. But in the rush to adopt it, we threw out thousands of years of accumulated wisdom. We started building glass boxes with sealed windows and cranked up compressors to fight the heat we were generating ourselves. Now we're locked into a loop. Buildings get hotter, we run more AAC. AC burns more energy, the planet gets warmer, buildings get hotter. You see the problem. The physics that powered ancient cooling systems didn't expire. The stack effect is still real. Hot air still rises, cool air still sinks. Adobe walls 3 feet thick still insulate against 50-degree heat better than thin modern drywall. These principles never stopped working, we just stopped using them. Which is exactly why what's happening in Harare, Zimbabwe is such a big deal. The Eastgate Center is a massive commercial building. shopping mall, offices, the works. It was designed by architect Mick Pierce, who looked at how termite mounds regulate their internal temperature and then traced that back to ancient passive cooling logic. The building uses a system of vents and shafts that pull cool air up from the ground level and exhaust hot air out through the roof. Sound familiar? It should. It's a modern Badger. The result? The Eastgate Center uses 90% less energy than a comparable, conventionally air-conditioned building. 90%. That's not an incremental improvement. That's a reinvention. And it's not alone. Abu Dhabi's International Airport incorporated Qanat-inspired underground channels into its design to handle passive cooling in one of the hottest, driest climates on the planet. Engineers in India and parts of Africa are reviving the Zierpot concept for off-grid refrigeration in communities that don't have reliable electricity. The solutions already exist. They've existed for millennia. People are just now remembering to look backwards. There's also a scientific term worth knowing here, the Bernoulli effect. When air moves faster, its pressure drops. Qanats exploit this by creating narrow underground passages where airflow speeds up and pressure decreases, pulling cool underground air into the living spaces above. It's the same principle that makes airplane wings generate lift. The Persians figured this out empirically through observation and experimentation, centuries before anyone had a word for it. And here's what really puts it in perspective. Studies comparing these passive systems to modern electric fans in dry climates show efficiency gains of 20 to 30% in favor of the ancient methods. In the right environment, hot and dry, they're not just a novelty, they're genuinely superior. The catch is that they don't work everywhere. In humid climates, evaporative cooling falls apart because the air is already saturated with moisture and can't absorb more. That's a real limitation. But for a massive portion of the world's population living in arid and semi-arid regions across the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, these systems are not just viable, they're optimal. The economic case is impossible to argue with. Zero operating costs, no moving parts to replace, no compressor to service, no refrigerant to recharge. The materials, clay, adobe, stone, are local, cheap, and biodegradable. A windcatcher built well can outlast generations of homeowners. Some of the ones in Yazd have been functioning continuously for hundreds of years. Try saying that about a split-unit AC. The bigger picture here is that we live in this cultural moment where we assume newer is always better. That ancient people were just doing their best until someone smarter came along with electricity and fixed everything. But that's not the story here. The story here is that necessity bred solutions so well adapted to their environment that they are still, by multiple measurable standards, the best options available. We didn't improve on them. We replaced them with something flashier that came with a monthly bill. Sustainability experts working on net zero building design are increasingly going back to these blueprints. Not as a gimmick or an aesthetic choice, but as a genuine engineering solution to a genuine crisis. If buildings account for nearly 40% of global energy consumption, and a huge chunk of that is cooling, then cracking passive cooling at scale isn't just interesting, it's necessary. So the next time someone dismisses ancient wisdom as primitive, remember Yazd. Remember those 30-meter towers still pulling cool air through homes in the Iranian desert. Remember 2 clay pots and wet sand keeping food cold in 45-degree heat. Remember a building in Zimbabwe slashing its energy bill by 90% by looking to the past for the answer. The ancient engineers didn't have computers. They didn't have fluid dynamics textbooks. They had observation, patience, and a refusal to accept discomfort as inevitable. And honestly, maybe we could use a little more of that. But here's what nobody's talking about. There's one specific design feature from these ancient systems that modern engineers are quietly trying to replicate right now, and they still haven't fully cracked it. We'll get into exactly what that is and why it matters more than anything else we've covered today.